will shine in the world like bright stars because you are offering it the word of life.
Alleluia. Alleluia.
Alleluia. The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke.
Glory to you, Lord.
Jesus said to his disciples, "Obstacles are sure to come, but alas for the one who provides them. It would be better for him to be thrown into the sea with a millstone around his neck than that he should lead astray a single one of these little ones. Watch yourselves. If your brother does something wrong, reprove him, and if he is sorry, forgive him. And if he wrongs you 7 times a day, and comes 7 times a day to say, 'I am sorry,' you must forgive him." The apostles said to the Lord, "Increase our faith." And the Lord replied, "Were your faith the size of a mustard seed, you could say to this mulberry tree, 'Be uprooted and planted in the sea,' and it would obey you." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
St. Martin, whose feast day we are celebrating today, has a very high profile in the church of today, despite the fact that he lived in the 4th century, as Father Aidan pointed out. In his early life, he was a soldier, not a Christian. He was baptized after a good many years, and for his baptism, he had as his godfather, if you like, St. Hilary. And his conversion to the Christian way was very, very deep and personal. He became a monk. He began a monastery, and then he was elected bishop. And I think he was the first bishop of that city in France, which is often called the eldest daughter of the church. And they honor him very, very much as one of the founding fathers of the church in France. Even after he was bishop, he still continued to found monasteries and to encourage a very active life of prayer among the people of his diocese. The gospel reading today, the disciples asked Jesus, "Give us strength in our faith. Help us to believe." And he said in reply, "If only you had even a tiny little grain of faith in your life, even the size of a tiny mustard seed. If you had such faith, you could tell the tree, 'Be uprooted and go and plant yourself in the sea,' and it would do so." So what a challenge it is to us. It often seems to me, in this country, you sometimes meet people, which you don't often happen in Ireland, who are baptized not as a child, but in their adult life. And very often they have a different, they value their baptism and the gift of faith more deeply sometimes than we do, who are baptized as tiny children, and we sort of grew up without really knowing too much that we had received such a gift in our lives. For many of us, it seems to me that we have belief in a God who is quite distant from us, a God who needs to be pleased, a God who is watching, and we try to get him to listen to us, try to get him to help us, and so on. And, well, that's often how we seem to feel, particularly when things goes wrong. How can I get God to listen? And that has been true in different cultures all around the world. People were offering sacrifices and gifts, all sorts of things, even sometimes sacrificing humans to try and get the gods to be on their side. But when Jesus came, when his birth was announced to the Virgin Mary, he was told his name will be Emmanuel, which means God is with us, God is among us. The Word, who in the beginning was God, the Word became flesh and lives among us. And so we are not dealing with a God who is distant. We are dealing with a God very, very close to us. And our faith is about a God, not even a God who dwells here in our beautiful church or in the Blessed Sacrament, which we will be adoring and praying to after Mass today, but he dwells even in the hearts and the lives of every one of us. And so we are trying to be in contact with a God who dwells within us. Jesus, sometimes it seems to me, he often said that we should be childlike, but not childish. I'd like you a little bit to reflect on how you have grown in your understanding of your belief in God as the years have passed in your life. In our family, we had one auntie. She was not married, and she was a tremendous figure in the wider family. And she was full of stories and songs and poems. And she used to love telling stories, as she was my godmother. And she would love telling stories years and years later of things I did when I was a small child. I don't know if they were all true or if she was making up things. But anyway, one of the stories she used to tell was, when I was a child, and this is true, my best friend, even though I had two brothers and a sister, and relatives and others, my closest friend was probably Jip, who was our little dog. He wasn't a special dog, he was a little mongrel terrier. But Jip and I were great friends. I had no idea how old he was. He was a good deal older than I was. I didn't know that. But I began to notice he wasn't doing fine. And so, being a good child, I went to the adults and said, what should I do? Jip is not fine. And somebody said to me, you should pray. Ask Jesus and Jip will be all right. So I took it very seriously. I went to the church with my penny, bought a candle, lit the candle, and asked Jesus to look after Jip. I came home feeling great. But Jip didn't change. And after not very long time, he died. So I was very upset and annoyed that God should do this. And according to my auntie, the next Sunday, we were all at Mass. We used to sit on one bench. And when it came to communion, I hadn't made my first communion. I elbowed my way out to join the queue for communion. She grabbed me and pulled me. Where do you think you're going? And according to her, I said, I'm going up to bite Jesus because he let Jip die. I had a very clear notice. Jesus was up there and he could do everything. He was on, but that was a childish way of trusting in God. And Jesus said, don't be childish, but try and have a childlike faith, an open, loving, trustful relationship with God. Get to know him, get to love him. I can recall going into the seminary, and I had, I suppose, a slightly more adult faith at that time. But after a number of years in the seminary, we were sent off on summer projects from the seminary. And I was sent off to do a student work camp. It was up in the north of Ireland, County Donegal, with Father MacDiarmid and Glen Columkill, for anybody who knows that part of the world. And there were about 35 of us there, all students from different parts of Europe, who were giving up a summer, 6 weeks in the summer, to do a social work. We were up there digging drains on the mountainside from a little lake, bringing water down, laying pipes, and bringing water to the cottages that were scattered around the glen. And it was terrific work. And of course, in the evening time, there would be long discussions and arguments. And when they discovered that I was not just a believer, many of them weren't believers, but when they discovered I was a believer and I was going on for the church, often in the evenings they would attack me about all sorts of issues around being a Catholic. The wealth of the Vatican, contraception, and I was doing my best to defend the church. But as it went on, I began to discover I was only repeating things that had been taught to me. And I began to say, look at you. You're not too far away from being ordained, and yet you're living what I call a borrowed life. You are leaning on other people's ideas. And I remember going back to the seminary after that summer and wondering, should I go on for the priesthood? Have I got faith to go on and be a priest? And luckily for me, there was an elderly priest who said, of course, continue. Faith is something that is growing and developing, and it's something that you acquire as you go through life, both in praying and in how you relate and live your life. relate to others, and live your life. That's how I was, and I'm trying to encourage you today to look back and see, where is your faith at from the time you were a child or from the time you were baptized until the present time. A number of years ago, I was based in Nigeria at the time, and I could sense, I was doing a building and various things, I could sense that chest pains, and I reckoned there was a problem, and it turned out there was. Anyhow, I had a good friend from the Lebanon, and we had helped him very much, and he was a close friend, and he insisted, if you are going home, then you have to go home via Lebanon. You can't just go home. I want you to come with me, you're going to meet my family, and so on. It was during the time of the Civil War in Lebanon. The airport was closed. We had to go to Cyprus and take a little fishing boat to get into Lebanon. Anyway, we did, and I met his family and experienced all what it was like being a Christian in that country at that time during the war. And Mike, which was his name, Mike often spoke to me about St. Charbel. St. Charbel is a great Lebanese saint who was canonized by Pope Paul VI. And he was like a one-man Lord. He had so many healings and miracles attributed to him. So I said to Mike, can we go up to the monastery of St. Charbel where he's buried? Because I want to pray. I want to go. And Mike said, well, it's not so easy. Give us a few days. We'll arrange it. And eventually he dressed me up a bit like Yasser Arafat with a headgear and a long white gown. And he said, you wear dark glasses and say nothing. We do the talking because we're going to be stopped by many military checkpoints. And so we did. Off we went up the hill into the mountain, and there we came to the grave, the little monastery where St. Charbel was. We got out of the car and we went along. It was a foggy November day, and inside the church you go down to the crypt. And in the days before going, I had said to myself, have I enough faith to go and ask Jesus directly, heal me? And I said that's what I was going to do. When I got to St. Charbel's grave, that was my prayer. And even walking down in the crypt, Mike was following me, that was still in my mind to make that prayer. When I got to his glass case and his body was in there, lights and so on, there was almost nobody there except ourselves. And instead of the prayer that I had been preparing for some days, I basically prayed, into your hands, Lord, whatever, I commend my will. Let your will be done, not mine. And I didn't get any healing that day. The healing came maybe when I got the operation in the hospital in Dublin. But what did happen that day was an extraordinary gift of inner peace came to me. And I put that down as one of the most decisive moments of experiencing God in my life. I'm encouraging you during this week to look back and try and identify the moments when God has been active in your lives. Often when we do that, we think of the days of happiness and blessing. But sometimes God is very present to us in the dark days, in the days when we feel abandoned, when we feel things have gone wrong. Often, when we look back, we can discover God was active there at that time, and I didn't feel it. You remember the story of the transfiguration of Jesus? Who did he take? Peter, James, and John, just the three whom he seemed to favor. He brought them up a high mountain and was transfigured. And Moses and Elijah appeared to him. And he was talking about his suffering and his death, which was coming. And we are told the gospel sort of apologized for Peter. He said, it's good for us to be here. We want to make 3 little tabernacles here, one for you, one. And the writer of the gospel said, he was so filled with fear, he didn't know what to say. They were apologizing for Peter. He just missed the whole event. But later on, after the resurrection of Jesus, and Peter was now a convinced believer and a leader of the Christian community, and he wrote his letters. And one of them he says, excuse me, listen to what I'm saying. I know what I'm saying because I saw his glory on the mountain. The day it happened, he didn't know what was going on. But he was able to look back, something that had happened quite a time before, and say, yes, now that was the event that has changed my relationship with the Lord Jesus. And that's my hope. Many people come to me and they say, Father, I seem to be losing my faith. I seem to be doubting everything. Faith, the opposite of faith is not doubt. The opposite of faith is certainty. Faith doesn't give us certainty. So don't be upset if you feel you are doubting things that you used to believe long ago. The search for the activity of God in your life. God is close to us. God reaches out to you. It's not you trying to reach out to God. Let me finish with the words of St. Augustine. He says, to fall in love with God is the greatest of all romances. To seek him is the greatest adventure. And to find him is the greatest human achievement.
As we journey together in faith, we come before the Lord with our needs and the needs of his faithful people everywhere. We ask that in this time of mission, our faith may be deepened, our awareness of the power and the presence of God's love may grow within us. Lord, hear us.
Lord, graciously hear us.
We remember those who are struggling in faith, those for whom God seems absent at this particular time. Through our prayers, may they come once more to know the gracious power of his love in their lives. Lord, hear us.
Lord, graciously hear us.
We remember those of our parish who are sick, those who are in hospital at this time. May the Lord's healing presence come to them. Lord, hear us.
Lord, graciously hear us.
In this month of remembrance, we remember those of our family, of our parish community, those who gave their life in the service of others, who have gone before us, marked by the sign of faith. May they come to know the joy and glory of the resurrection. Lord, hear us.
Lord, graciously hear us.
In the stillness of our own hearts, we make our silent prayers. We ask the intercession of Mary, our Mother, as we pray, O Mary, conceived without sin.
Pray for us in our
Loving God, we make these prayers with great confidence in the power of your Spirit and in the name of your Son, Jesus, who is our Lord forever and ever.
Amen.
Blessed are you, Lord, God of all creation, through your goodness we have spread to all which earth has given and human hands have made, it will become for us the bread of life.
Blessed be God forever.
Blessed are you, Lord God of all creation. Through your goodness we have this wine to offer. Fruit of the vine and work of human hands, it will become our spiritual.
Blessed be God forever.
Pray, my friends, that our prayers may be acceptable to God the Almighty Father.
May the Lord accept the sacrifice of your hands, for the praise and glory of his name, for our good and the Holy Church.
Sanctify these offerings, we pray, Lord God, which we joyfully present in honor of St. Martin, so that through them our life may be directed, whether in tribulation or in prosperity. We ask this through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
Lift up your hearts.
Faithful unto the Lord.
Let us give thanks to the Lord our God.
It is right and just.
It is truly right and just, our duty and our salvation, always and everywhere to give you thanks, Father most holy, through your beloved Son, Jesus Christ, your Word, through whom you made all things, whom you sent as our Saviour and Redeemer, incarnate by the Holy Spirit, born of the Virgin. Fulfilling your will and gaining for you a holy people, he stretched out his hands as he endured his passion, so as to break the bonds of death and manifest the resurrection. And so with angels and all the saints, we declare your glory as with one voice we acclaim. You are indeed holy, O Lord, the fount of all holiness. Make holy, therefore, these gifts, we pray, by sending down your Spirit upon them like the dewfall, that they may become for us the body and blood of our Lord Jesus Christ. At the time he was betrayed and entered willingly into his passion, he took bread and giving thanks, broke it, gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take this, all of you, and eat of it, for this is my body, which will be given up for you." In a similar way, when supper was ended, he took the chalice. Once more giving thanks, he gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take this, all of you, and drink from it. For this is the chalice of my blood, the blood of the new and eternal covenant, which will be poured out for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins. Do this in memory of me." Joy we proclaim the mystery of our faith. When we eat this bread and drink this cup, we proclaim your death, O Lord, until you come again. Therefore, as we celebrate the memorial of his death and resurrection, we offer you, Lord, the bread of life and the chalice of salvation, giving thanks that you have held us worthy to be in your presence and minister to you. Humbly we pray that partaking of the body and blood of Christ, we may be gathered into one by the Holy Spirit. Remember, Lord, your church spread throughout the world. Bring her to the fullness of charity, together with Francis, our Pope, Vincent, our Bishop, and all who minister to your people. Remember your servant, Eileen Elizabeth Moore, whom you've called from this world to yourself. Grant that she who was united with your Son in a death like his may also be one with him in resurrection.
Remember also our brothers and sisters who have fallen asleep in the hope of the resurrection, and all who have died in your mercy. Welcome them into the light of your face. Have mercy on us all, we pray, that with the Blessed Virgin Mary, Mother of God, St. Joseph, her spouse, the blessed apostle, and all the saints who have pleased you throughout the ages, we may merit to be co-heirs to eternal life, and may praise and glorify you through your Son, Jesus Christ.
Through him, and with him, and in him, O God, Almighty Father, in the unity of the Holy Spirit, all glory and honor is yours forever and ever.
Amen.
Confident in God's abiding love for each of us, we pray. Our
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil.
Deliver us, Lord, we pray, from every evil. Graciously grant peace in our day, that by the help of your mercy we may be always free from sin, safe from all distress, as we await the blessed hope and the coming of our Saviour, Jesus Christ.
For the kingdom, power, and glory are yours now and forever.
Lord Jesus Christ, you said to your apostles, peace I leave you, my peace I give you. Look not on our sins, but on the faith of your church. Graciously grant your peace and unity in accordance with your will, who live and reign forever and ever.
Amen.
May the peace of the Lord be with you always.
And with your spirit.
And we offer each other a sign of Christ's peace.
Peace be with you. 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 Peace be with Chris.
Lamb of God,
You take away the sins of the world, have mercy on us. Lamb of God, you take away the sins of the world, have mercy on us. Lamb of God, you take away the sins of the world, have mercy on us.
behold the Lamb of God, behold him who takes away the sins of the world. Happy are those who are called to the supper of the Lamb.
Lord, I am not worthy that you should enter my home, but only say a word, and my soul shall be healed.
May the body of Christ bring all of us to everlasting life.
Amen.
just as St. Martin submitted himself entirely to you, so we too may glory in being truly yours. We ask this through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
We began our morning at 7 this morning with a typical Mill Hill class with coffee and croissants and some reflection on the scripture. I don't know if there's any croissants left, but I know there's coffee left in the hall if you'd like to join us afterwards for that. During the day between 3 and 4 o'clock, one of us will be here in the chapel each day of the week. If anybody would like to drop in, have a chat with us or discuss anything, whatever it is about themselves or life or the church, we'd be delighted to meet them. And our mission continues at 7:30 this evening. Today I understand you have exposition every Monday, so it will continue as normal after our celebration. So the Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
May Almighty God bless all of us, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Our Mass is ended. We go in peace to love and serve the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Our final hymn is 971.